Welcome back for a new version or an updated version of my fighting game collection. This is part one of a two-part series update looking at my fighting games. So we're going to start with the newer stuff, then go to older stuff. Reverse of normal. First, we start off with Nintendo Switch, and the first thing from the Switch, of course, the Samurai Showdown Neo Geo collection from Limited Run Games. Next, we have also for the Switch, Neo, or rather, Dragon Ball Fighters. A pretty solid anime fighter overall. Next, we have Mortal Kombat 11. Though, unfortunately, this version isn't that great overall, at least in the domain of overall graphics and stuff. There's definitely also frame rate issues. But surprisingly, it still runs decent for how less powerful the Switch is. And then we have the Street Fighter 30th Anniversary Collection, which is arguably a true, I consider a must-have compilation. Then we have SNK Heroines Tag Team Frenzy, which is a very unusual game, to say the least. Definitely does not play as much like your traditional SNK fighter. Then we have Power Rangers Battle for the Grid, which I do highly recommend picking up. You can get this game relatively cheap, and this edition, Collector's Edition, also includes all the Season 1 characters, though does not include Season 2 and stuff, but it does include one additional character with this from, as you see, from Samurai. Next, another anime fighter, we have My Hero 1's Justice, which I still haven't gotten around to actually playing. I'm assuming though it plays like most of your standard 3D arena style anime fighters from Namco Bandai. Speaking of anime fighters, from Arc System Works, Blaze Blue Cross Tag, which is a game that's more or less, I would say, is pretty much dead, at least online-wise now. Still interesting game and interesting franchises of the crossover. Given you have Ruby, you have Guilty Gear, well, some, and you have, of course, predominantly Blaze Blue characters as well as Under Night and Birth, and of course, Persona. Next, we have an interesting indie fighting game with a collection of different characters from many different indie franchises in Blade Strangers, which is an interesting game. It definitely plays and stuff. It's very much like a classic 2D fighter. I appreciate it. The music is pretty solid, and I love playing with Shovel Knight. Second to last for the Switch, we have Skullgirls Second Encore, which is an incredible, awesome fighter, I might add. And last, we have Ultra Street Fighter 2, which is a great, I think, probably the best up-to-date version of the game if you don't want the classic. Next, quickly go to the handheld. We have, of course, Super Smash Bros. For the 3DS, which I highly recommend picking this up. It's also from Smash on the Go. We have a great, believe it or not, this was a launch title, and that is Super Street Fighter 4 3D Edition, which is actually really solid and plays great. Then we have, in my opinion, a criminally underrated port or game, and that is Dead or Alive Dimensions. I think this is one of the best Dead or Alive games just because I like the story mode. It pretty much feels in story all the way from the first game all the way to Dead or Alive 4, which I like a lot. And in fact, you can unlock and play with all the bosses from the series. It's pretty cool too. Next, going on now to the Wii U. First, we have Pokken Tournament, which is an interesting sort of Pokemon take on, I guess you could say, Tekken. Which makes sense also the way they named it Pokken Tournament in the place of Tekken Tournament. Still, interesting, unique game, definitely, from Pokemon. Then we have, of course, Injustice Gods Among Us. Pretty solid game. Too bad the Wii U did not get the Ultimate version, which is unfortunate. Then we have another great Smash. One of the better Smashes with the Wii U, though I like 3DS a little bit more. Still, Smash 4 is a great game. And this is a game that's starting to go up a lot, slowly but surely, and that is Tekken Tag Tournament 2, the Wii U edition, since it has some interesting additional features and add-ons to the gameplay, a special mode that is exclusive only to this version. Now we go into the regular Wii. And first up, we have the King of Fighters Collection, the Orochi Saga, which includes King of Fighters 94, 95, 96, 97, and 98, which is awesome. And a great, also, at least it's compatible with the classic controller, so that definitely helps. And this is a great collection I highly recommend. Another game I recommend is Tetsunoku vs. Capcom, which only got released on the Wii, strangely enough. It's definitely one of the more interesting games of the crossover franchise. It definitely has its own unique feel, style, art style, as well as gameplay style. It is a little different, and the fact it has Alex and other, as well as Mega Man Legends characters, makes it interesting. Then we have arguably my favorite of the Smash series, that being Super Smash Bros. Brawl, which is arguably the best game in the series when it comes to single player content. And this game should get more love than it gets. Last, we have a very unique fighter, and that is Castlevania Judgment, which has characters throughout the series, but of course, most importantly, you can play as Alucard if you want. Next, we'll take a quick little break from Nintendo before we get to... first, let's go to a bit older. We have, of course, Super Smash Bros. Melee, which most people still consider to be the best game in the franchise. As I said, Brawl is my pick. I have Melee in like 3rd place. So, I disagree, but to each their own. I understand from the complexity of the combat mechanics are better and everything. Then we also have Soul Calibur 2, a classic and a must-have for GameCube fans, as well as Bloody Roar Primal Fury. Great game, highly recommend it. Sorry, I had to freeze to move some stuff around. And this is the last bit for Nintendo, then we go to Sega. Next video will be Sony and Microsoft. But here, first we have on the N64, sadly, without case, War Gods, an interesting game from Midway. This was basically the testing of the 3D engine that would end up being implemented in games like Mortal Kombat 4. Speaking of Mortal Kombat 4. Good solid games. The N64 version is better, at least speed-wise, but unfortunately graphically speaking, it couldn't hold a candle to like Gold, the ultimate version of the game, or even the PS1 version. And then we have a game I feel is underrated in my opinion, and that is Killer Instinct Gold. which is unfortunate. And I love the like cover picture art with Gargos on the front. Then we have Super Smash Bros., the original, the classic, the one that started the whole franchise as a whole. Definitely a must have for N64 fans. And now we go on to. First, we have the only Super Famicom game I actually have right now, and that is Street Fighter 2 Turbo. Of course, must have. Street Fighter 2 Turbo is just a good game. One thing I will say is I kind of like the cartridge designs on the Japanese version. It's unique, and I love the Famicom like color symbol. I just find it unique and different from the Super Nintendo. Then we have an interesting fighter with, of course, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the Fighting Edition, which is great, and I love that on the cover art, with Zed getting punched by the Thunder Megazord. Then we have, sadly it's not in perfect condition unfortunately, but got for dirt cheap years back, Super Street Fighter 2. Unfortunately, this is inferior by far to the Turbo, just because of how slow the game actually is speed-wise. Where Turbo plays a lot better and has aged better overall. Though this game would get introduction of new characters, like Fei Long, Cammy, T-Hawk. And then we have the ultimate beautiful black cartridge with the original classic Killer Instinct with Fogor on the cover art. And this is probably what first got me interested in Fogor. I loved his design and look. And last but not least, on the Nintendo side of things, Super Street Fighter 2, or rather just Street Fighter 2 Turbo. I like the box art seeing E Honda just spamming that stupid punch of his at Sagat. But with that said, I'm going to quickly freeze and we'll start on Sega. Welcome back. Quickly before we go into Sega, show a couple things from other console I have. Only 2 games anyways, fighting wise. First, Samurai Showdown port for the Panasonic 3DO, and of course the great Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo for the Panasonic 3DO, which is easily the best of the classic ports, hands down. Next, we have a couple for the Pocket Color, and that is, first we have the King of Fighters R2, which is actually a pretty solid handheld game. Then we have Fatal Fury Contact, which is another classic. Samurai Showdown 2. And surprisingly, these do play amazing. And last, the more important one of the batch, and it is SNK vs. Capcom Match of the Millennium. Now with Sega, I'm going to start back instead from the beginning and end it with my favorite console. So first we have, with the Genesis, Fatal Fury, the original classic, though it is not the greatest port, that's for sure. It's inferior, but this is how I first was introduced to Fatal Fury series. Then we have Street Fighter 2 Championship Edition. Interesting box art, but I will say I do like the game. It plays pretty much the same as Turbo. just different name. Then we, of course, we have Super Street Fighter 2, which, as I said already, is an inferior version, but still, it is a classic regardless. Then we have the original classic Mortal Kombat that began and started the entire franchise as a whole, which I still think is a classic. Then we have a lot of people's favorite of the classic series, and that being Mortal Kombat 2. Then we have my personal favorite of the classic era, Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3. Though I think Vanilla 3 also plays really good. It's sad this version is not a great version of Ultimate 3, but still, when I had the chance to get it, I got it just because of memories of this game. Welcome back for the rest. Welcome back now for the Sega Saturn. We have a 3D Fighters interesting game that is pretty cool still, with fighting Vipers. A very unique fighter that allowed you to actually fight with a racing car, believe it or not. And yes, I'm not even joking. We also had probably my favorite in the Samurai Classic Sam Show Collect series, that being Samurai Showdown 4 is definitely one of my all-time favorites. This was actually the first Sam Show game I actually ever owned. Then, if you're an SNK fan, also had amazing ports of KOF. Verse 95, great port, as well as 96 and 97. Interesting box art. Also, we had, for Street Fighter fans, Street Fighter Collection, which is great, and I highly recommend it. If you can find it for a reasonable price, keep in mind. Then we go to Marvel for a sec with Marvel Superheroes, which is a all-time classic, in my opinion. Then we go to another classic, a lot of people's personal favorite, that being X-Men vs. Street Fighter, which is great. Then there's, in my opinion, the superior version with Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter, which I liked because you could play with Blackheart and others, and fight against Cyber Akuma. Then we had the very unique robot fighting game with Cyberbots, and this is actually where Jin in the Marvel vs. Capcom series actually origins came from this game. Then we had the second game in the Darkstalkers series with Vampire Hunter, also known as Night Warriors in the West. And there on the front, awesome artwork with Donovan. Then we have known as Darkstalkers 3 in the West, Vampire Savior, arguably the pinnacle of the series. Then you had a launch title with Virtual Fighter Remix. All-time classic, and you can still get very cheap. Then what I had packed in originally with my Saturn, Virtual Fighter 2. With the cheap, crappy cardboard thing, unfortunately. Then we go with the Jumbo, with the game that started the entire series. Yep, and you see up there the logo for Acclaim, which was known for doing a lot of ports. With X-Men Children of the Atom, the game that would start the crossover franchise. Hard to believe it all began with this. Then you have the very not so good Street Fighter the movie, the game. Yeah, a movie that was based on a video game, and then a game based on a movie based on a game. And so cheesy, and sadly they tried to copy Mortal Kombat with motion capture and stuff. unfortunately. Yeah, digitized graphics as it says right there. Last on the Saturn we have Battle Arena Toshinden Remix, which included like some anime style cutscenes and stuff that they added. And the cheesy bad dialogue and voice acting just makes it all the more enjoyable for me. Because I'm somebody who enjoys that stuff. Now, last but not least, first, the only loose fighter I have, the original Soul Calibur. This was the very first, of course, game I ever had for Dreamcast that I got with it at launch. Now, let's look at some of the American stuff before we go to the import. First, we have the King of Fighters Evolution, which is basically the ultimate version of KOF 99, which is arguably a good fighter, and I do recommend Evolution if you have a Dreamcast. Next, we have the classic Capcom vs. SNK, the original, and this is by far the best version of the game. It's far superior to that crappy port that they did for the PS1. Then we have another classic which you can still get very good, and that is Dead or Alive 2, another all-time classic fighter. Then we have with just a cheap reproduction case I bought, since the original case long ago lost, so that's why it doesn't look quite right. Sadly, they could have done a better job with a reproduction case. I'm trying to find a better quality one. Hopefully eventually I'll luck out. But yeah, Project Justice, a very interesting game, direct sequel of course to Rival Schools from the PS1. Then we have a somewhat unique fighting game in Psychic Force 2012. Boy, the future 2012, when this was released in like 99, 2000. Yeah, and now we're 9 years past that. How time flies. Then we have Street Fighter 3 Double Impact, which of course is a double feature with Street Fighter 3 New Generation, my personal favorite, and Second Impact, which is definitely has a very hardcore loyal following. And of course, can't forget Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, which is definitely a better port than the like special anniversary collection one that was released on other consoles. Though if you want a really good version of this game, I highly recommend the online edition for PS3 and 360. Unfortunately, digital only, but by far the best. If you want physical, this is the best port. Last of the American, we have Marvel vs. Capcom 1 and 2. All-time classics, and nothing will ever replace the specialness that is these two games. There's just something very special about them. Well, and one more Western release game, and that is, of course, Mortal Kombat Gold, the best version of MK4. Now we go on to imports. First we have Virtual Fighter 3, which is arguably a all-time classic. I highly recommend to anyone. Then we have the original Japanese release of the original Soul Calibur, which of course there are special cheat codes that only work for the Japanese import version, for some odd reason. Then we have my personal favorite of the KOF series, the King of Fighters 2000. I know it's not one of the most popular beloved games in the series, it's fun, but this is the game that actually got me more interested in KOF, was this game specifically. I like the music, the animation, and basically everything about this game I just really like. Even though I'll admit the main boss of the game isn't necessarily as hard as some other SNK bosses, maybe it's another thing I like about it. Then we go to a classic that is Street Fighter Zero 03, also known as Alpha 3. Personally, I prefer the American release case over the Japanese version, though it is definitely interesting and different, to say the least. Then we have the awesome artwork and stuff for the cover art for Street Fighter 3 Double Impact. The Japanese release definitely got the better case in my opinion. Then we have the Japanese release version of Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. And I'll say I actually like this cover art better also than the American version. Then we go to Capcom vs. SNK, the original. And I like that cover art, I'll admit. Then also Japan also got this, the Pro. It got 2 releases, and this version included added Joe and Dan to the game, and not too much else, and that made some tweaks to the gameplay. That's about it. Then of course, you have Capcom vs. SNK 2. And the reason I have 2 is 1 regular, and this one is still factory sealed new, which is why I got 2 copies, so I can enjoy it. But to me, this is probably the best way to play the game. But outside of this, I would say original Xbox is probably the second best way to play. And last but not least is the Japanese import version of Project Justice. And I love this cover design and everything about it. But with that said, that is part 1, looking at an updated version of Fighting Game Collection. And I'll see y'all next time for part 2, which will be Sony and Microsoft. So see you then. Hopefully you enjoyed the retro wave music in the background, and a little trip down memory lane for me. But I'll see you soon enough. Stay safe.